Hi, my name is Pearse and I'm a director in the European Commission. I work in the department which is called DG Connect, but my work is particularly on all things to do with future networks, which includes cloud and particularly software and open source software.
Thank you very much for the introduction. In your view and experience, what is the value of open source for Europe?
Open source represents a way for Europe to break into some markets where we already have a few owners of proprietary technology which are outside Europe, but which now are instrumental in running the internet and new digital technologies. So by using open source, we lower the barriers to entry. We also encourage innovation. We lower the cost, and that way we can create a whole new generation of software houses, of tech startups, and provide all sorts of open source tools to small companies in Europe that will actually grow the European economy.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now that the European Open Source Academy and its awards have been launched, what are your thoughts on the establishment of a recognition and awards frameworks for European open source?
I think this is a great sign that the open source community in Europe has come of age, that it is mature enough, but also confident enough now to recognize its own role, to celebrate the achievements that it has made, but also to use the award and the Academy as a way of showcasing the work that has been done and of attracting others, including innovators who might otherwise think that the best way is to try to work for a large multinational corporation, when in fact working for open source is not just rewarding, but it is actually a path for economic growth and success.
Thank you very much. Coming to the next question, perhaps drawing from your current activities, are there any European-led or European-funded initiatives that you think the European open source community should pay particular attention to or follow?
Yes, as we look at Europe's competitiveness in digital technologies, and as we see the hugely disruptive nature of AI, we're having to ensure that Europe has its own infrastructures to deliver digital services right out to the edge of the European Union, and from a technician's point of view, right out to the edge of the network. And here, open source is a very easy tool for allowing new technologies to be addressed, and it's something that is now mainstreamed into our policies. So some aren't visible to the citizen or the consumer, such as funding digital technologies such as edge computing. And here specifically, we will be piloting a European OpenStack, which is of course by the nature of its title open source, in order to provide a suite of services that small companies can benefit in. Also, when we look at all of the work that is done on data and data spaces, which we have invested a lot in, we need to be able to be sure that those data spaces are interoperable, that they can actually transfer data in a safe way according to the governance rules of each of those data spaces. And for that, we are funding an open source middleware called Simple. So those are just two examples, but increasingly we find that in every element of the value chain, there is a open source element which actually makes it more European, more easily accessible, and now most importantly, and this has been one of the great developments in open source, more secure.
Amazing. Thank you so much. If you could reach out to the European source community of developers, companies, and actors, what would you like to say to them?
That because of the growing maturity and importance of open source, we are taking you very seriously. But it also means that you have greater responsibility. As open source becomes a very useful and viable alternative to proprietary software, we will, of course, as regulators, as policymakers, impose obligations on you that perhaps you weren't expecting in the days of community coding for social purposes. In other words, starting with cybersecurity rules. The Cyber Resilience Act was a bit of a shock to everybody in the open source community, but it's a sign of just how important it is, the sector, but it's also a recognition as to how important open source products are in the economy. So it's a question of don't be afraid of this public policy element, because can also support you, and that we want to work with you. We do understand that we're not the experts, you are the experts, and you need to tell us what are the constraints technically, financially, as well as practically in the rollout of open source so that we can assist you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. For the last question, would you like to talk about something that we haven't touched upon in the questions?
I think it's the way that the open source community talks to policymakers in general. Now, maybe I would not be included in this because I have spent a lot of time working on open source and talking to the community. But I think at local level, national level with governments, and of course at EU level, the open source community in its regular context needs to be able to explain how open source works. It needs to now remove some of the myths that still hang on, particularly among those who do not know much about it. But also, the main message that I wanted to give is be as ambitious as you can. Europe needs open source in order to reach its competitiveness objectives.